Here's a video I've been afraid to tackle for a while, due to the highly controversial debate that's been happening in video games media the last couple of years. Nevertheless, I feel like it's important to talk about this subject in a neutral and logical position, regardless of opinion. So here we go. The issue about which everyone seems to be making a big fuss over is representation in video games. And this can be summed up quite nicely. While one side is worried about representing real-world issues in media, so that people may be positively influenced from such media, the other side argues that this logic will limit the spectrum of themes and morality that can be represented in a game. Although I do lean towards one of the sides, I'd argue that the problem is completely different, and fixing it requires looking at video games in the way that we should have been analyzing them all along. I will argue here that we should judge a video game, or any sort of media, not by the morality of its theme, but by the quality of its content. And I'll go as far as to say that this will solve every single problem both the morality crowd and the freedom crowd have with the video game industry. Yes, it's a tall order. Bear with me now. Let's start from the beginning. The bald space marine stereotype, as it's commonly referred to shove a character with the exact same tone, appearance, or personality into the role of a protagonist. This is boring, because sometimes we'd rather see something else. The explanation for this is simple. In the words of Josh Sawyer, creator of the Icewind Dale saga and Fallout New Vegas, the blank slate protagonist is used because the industry wants to take as few risks as possible by introducing the safest option they can for a protagonist that everybody can be equally bored by. They can't be wacky, wisecracking, weak, or any sort of personality failure, because it can't elicit any kind of meaningful emotional reaction from the audience. It's basically a boring commercial product. Blame the current system that makes sure that boring games make up the majority of the bigger market. Bigger and prettier games get more of the public's attention, so the only way for companies to get a safe hit is to keep pumping out insanely boring blockbuster action cash-ins padded with meaningless fluff to suit a safer audience, to which they'll end up spending the majority of the budget in an overdone and obnoxious advertising campaign, just so their investment has a guaranteed return. This system forces the bigger companies to follow suit or risk a potential failure, and nobody wants to be responsible for such a thing. The alternative, of course, is to go indie, and unless the developers are either experienced or really good at their job, the project is then downscaled to a much smaller piece of entertainment, and can't possibly make the same splash as any of the big guys. Let's look at a game from 1995, which most of you are probably not aware of. Chronomaster, a sci-fi detective story where Ron Perlman stars as the ex-Pocket Universe creator detective, hired to solve a state of temporal crisis. Doesn't it sound like an awesome, fresh, intelligent, and daring concept? But a complex sci-fi adventure with this kind of elements would never be financed today. No, today games have to be big, they have to be dumb, they have to be shallow. The few titles that slip through the cracks end up being praised by critics and audience, but not making a very big splash sales-wise to justify the zillions that were spent in the biggest budget titles that make the sales that publishers want. Series like Dead Space were murdered by their own publishers simply to make their as much money as possible in the shortest amount of time, or bust, because apparently that's all the market has room for. There's no more wide, labyrinthic, and expansive explorable action titles like Doom, because publishers treat players like idiots who can't find their way out of a single corridor. Complex combos are replaced with button mashing, strafe shooting is replaced with auto-aiming, and meaningful combat is replaced with QTEs. This is the problem. It's not about blaming morality that has to be preached, but about recognizing that dumb content is easy to make and easy to sell. And unfortunately, it makes up most of the market. So if dumb sells, and smart doesn't even get the chance, what hope is there, you ask? Well, good news. That's not true. Smart does sell and does have a chance. And here's how. Think of the most successful games of this generation. League of Legends and Minecraft. Put aside the cringeworthy fan bases they're known for and think about how they were both built upon something not yet tried in a larger market. An original concept that became a bigger thing thanks to its creativity and successful formula. In the end, the most popular and renowned titles that stand the test of time are always those that bring originality and freshness to the table, showing the audience something they had no idea they wanted so much. Second, yes, budget is a concern, but not as much as you'd think. Wonderful games can be made by a single individual. It's all about hard work and trying your expertise at a little bit of everything. Even when we stepped into bigger 3D releases, the visuals of some of the most smartest and most iconic titles didn't need fancy particle effects or hardcore textures in order to be good. Killer 7 used single color textures and simplistic 3D models, and it's one of the most beautiful games ever made. The visual quality of a game is not tied to the technology that is used, but to the artistry of its visuals. Third, interactivity. The cornerstone that defines video games. Animation without quality movement is just comics. A movie with a single camera angle and set is just theater. And games without meaningful interactivity are just movies. If you are working in a medium in which interactivity is the cornerstone of its creation, use it. Even if it's part of today's walking simulators, meaningful experiences can be crafted in such a genre. As long as it cherishes the player as part of a creative journey and doesn't just wave intellectual genitals in their faces as they're taken through a roller coaster of preachiness. Third, games need to piss off the players. And I don't mean by making bad business decisions. I mean by actually messing with people's feelings. Creators like Suda51 and Hideo Kojima have created sections of gameplay entirely to make a player feel a certain way, and to drive them through a roller coaster of emotions. Think of the greatest books, movies, or music in the world. They're not just meant to give the audience stable smiles and superficial happiness. They're meant to make them laugh and cry, make them feel guilt over a tough decision, or pain and sadness over something that they might have been able to stop. If they just give the player what they want, all they'll feel is slight enjoyment, which will too soon turn to boredom. Games need to surprise players. Instead of giving them the same mildly enjoyable masturbatory feeling all other popular forms of entertainment do, they need to have them question what the hell they're doing in this world. When a game respects the player's intelligence, its design, story, and formula are more civilized and well thought. And this does not mean that we have to give up silly humor or gratuitous violence. There's a big difference between a thoughtless, dumb Michael Bay bloodfest and a cool and satisfying Mad Max movie. A world of difference between Airplane and epic movie. Action and silly comedy are always welcome, but they have to be well made. There's a huge difference between this
A pirate I was meant to be, trim the
and this.
I used to be a vault hunter, like you. I took a bullet to the knee.
So, it doesn't matter what your game's about. As long as it's not a simulation that doesn't allow for creative input, it should try to respect the player by not just being a piece of cheap entertainment to be forgotten about next week, but a wonderful experience that is willing to take the player on a journey to places they never imagined, to be something important, to make them feel something. And here is where my original point stands. Creating an intelligent game that grants the player something they never thought they'd achieve in an experience. Something that makes the player feel richer and more fulfilled than when they first started playing. And that will have precisely what both sides in the controversial argument want. Both the cultural variety and representation that will naturally pop up regardless, due to the richer and more varied nature of experiences increasing a long time with more people from different cultures and walks of life trying their hand at creative work, as well as all sorts of themes, moralities, and different opinions and positions may be explored in whatever games anyone may choose to create in a rich and creative environment, populated with all sorts of ideas and peppered with as many controversial and crazy themes you can think of. Anything is possible. That is why we create games. Everybody wants better games. This is how you get them, by making them smarter.